world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Wednesday, the 19th of August, year of our Lord 2026. Well, today we're going to begin with a story of a cop who took on Flock. That's right, it doesn't turn out too well, or does it? He doesn't seem to be discouraged, even though whistleblowers get purged. This is what we see happening across the board. This idea of national security, where everything must be kept secret from you. This has metastasized, this cancer has metastasized to every level of government. This is just the most recent example of it. And this is a guy who took the Constitution seriously, unlike his superiors. People who stand up for the Constitution, who stand up for individual liberty, who have integrity, are purged from the system. Just the way it works. Meanwhile, people are raising concerns that Mark Levin and other Zionists are pushing Trump to consider using nuclear weapons against Iran. Of course, they'll probably wait until after the election. We'll be right back. Well, I want to begin today with a story. This is from Wired Magazine. When I first saw this, I was like, I got to get this guy on. But he's got reasons that he doesn't want to be interviewed. And we'll talk about that coming up. He's done a lot of interviews, but he's kind of stepping back from it now. I tried for years to find Adrian Schoolcraft. He was a guy who was a New York City police officer. His father had been a cop, and he really wanted to be a cop. He really wanted to help the community, and he really wanted to make things safer. And yet the police department there was telling them to just contrive crimes. This is at the time when they had just passed the, no smoking in any buildings. And if you had a barbershop, for example, if you owned it, or if you're working there as a barber and you step outside on the street and you light up a cigarette because you're not allowed to smoke in there, well, now you're loitering outside. We'll arrest you for that. He said one Halloween, they told the officers, just go out and grab people and bring them in. We'll figure out what the crimes are later. He was not happy with that at all. So he started wearing a concealed camera to show how the police were abusing their authority, the stop and frisk and all the rest of the stuff they were doing. And eventually they found out that he was wearing that. Well, before they found out he was wearing it, let me backtrack a little bit. Because he complained about some of this stuff, they thought they would punish him and make him walk a beat. He was never happier in his life. That's the way policing began in the early 20th century. I mean, you go back and you look at, musicals or whatever. You see the cop on the beat walking on, good day, so-and-so, sees the person who's the grocer or the baker or whatever. He knows all the people that are there. He knows the people who are in that community. So he knows when somebody that's not from that community is there, and he kind of keeps an eye on them. We don't have anything like that anymore. Now they ride around in police cars. They're disconnected from everybody. They don't know the people on their own beat. But he loved that. He said they thought it was punishment, but that's exactly what I wanted to do as a cop. Well, they eventually figured out that he was taping them. And so they went to his apartment. And I think it was the guy that was like one step below the police chief and another guy. And they confronted him. And they drug him off and put him in a mental institution. He just disappeared. And his father, who's a cop, started looking for him. He went to his apartment and he realized that Adrian had put a camera up on the bookshelf behind the books, concealed it. And he got that camera and he went through the footage. He saw what was happening. He got him out. But it was so bad with the New York Police Department after he went public with what they did. Not only what they did to him, but what they were doing to other people. It got so bad that he didn't want to talk to anybody. He and his father just got out of there. Well, that brings us to the story of Noel Picardo, who was working in a medium-sized Rhode Island town of Pawtucket, I think is the name of the town here. We've got it here. He was 28 years old, had been a cop for 5 years, and he's on patrol one day and he sees one of these flock devices, and he'd seen them before. 2 years earlier, they'd had a meeting where they brought the police in, and Flock did their presentation, telling them, oh, this is going to be a great tool. You should all have it. And he thought about it for a second. He thought, well, that could be abused in many different ways. But the town didn't have the money that Flock wanted at the time. So it didn't happen. It didn't go anywhere. And he kind of forgot about it. It came up again. And the Flock cameras were put out as a free trial. And they put a few of them up and ran as a free trial. They stopped it in May of 2023. Then in September 2023, they actually secretly signed a contract with Flock. $128,000 a year. I'm sorry, $128,000 for 2 years. So it's about $60,000 a year. That seems to be what their standard contract is. And that was only for about 20 cameras. Think about how much money Flock is making. They've gone from 400 cameras installed 3 years ago to 120,000 of them installed. Think about what they're making on a regular basis in terms of management for all this stuff. And think how much money taxpayers are being fleeced to pay for their own surveillance. I look at this, this truly is like Terry Gilliam's Brazil again. They come in, they bust through the ceiling and the doors on the walls and a no-knock raid, which when Terry Gilliam of Monty Python did that in 1984 when he put out Brazil, it was his dark comedy version of Orwell's Big Brother, 1984. And he did it in 1984. And at that point in time, that was so over the top, and yet they do that now. They do that on a regular basis, so it's not over the top. And so they spring in, this guy's just sitting there with his family just before Christmas quietly, and they had a case of mistaken identity. They tie him up, and they put a bag over him. It's like a giant mail bag or something, right? Put it over his head, and then another strap around that. And then the officious little guy in a suit comes in, and he hands the wife a piece of paper and says, have signed this here, blah, blah. And then he goes, here's your receipt for my receipt, and so forth. And they wind up charging this poor family for his interrogation. And they've got the wrong guy all along. So we are being charged for our surveillance. They can't spend that $128,000 on fixing potholes or bridges. No. It is about watching us to try to find a crime. And so he saw these things up. So I know what these things are, but there wasn't any information about it. So he calls the local city council rep. He said, had these cameras been approved? He didn't really get an answer from him. So he realized there was no public vote before the cameras were installed. He keeps looking around. Finally, he finds some information in the paper, a little bit of information in the paper. And he contacts them with his concerns. He said he was always inspired by whistleblowers like Frank Serpico and Ed Snowden, men of conviction who broke with powerful institutions. And you should stop and think about, what did Frank Serpico say? Of course, the story about Frank Serpico was he refused to go on the take for drugs, right? And again, the drug war has been lost for 50 years. Let's hope that we're not in Iran for 50 years. It's been 73 years that we've been after Iran, isn't it? That's when we overthrew their government and put in an authoritarian Shah, a king, and then had his ruthless secret police trained by the CIA Mossad. Let's hope that this Iran war is not going to drag on for 50 years. We get somebody else in there besides Trump. Maybe we can end it. But who knows? Nevertheless, when you look at the war on drugs, it hasn't done anything to stop addiction, has it? We all understand it's not working. What is their answer? Well, we'll just do more of the same thing. That, by definition, is insanity. They just double down on the authoritarian actions. And now Trump wants to go to a literal hot war with the drug cartels. That's going to backfire in a big way. It's going to make things much worse. But what they've done over a half a century is to give a very lucrative monopoly to the worst people. It'll never be solved by law enforcement, by force. It is a spiritual issue. That is the only way you're going to stop people from using drugs. And they don't realize that alcohol prohibition failed. We've had drug prohibition that has failed us with the Constitution. They didn't even bother to amend the Constitution like they did with alcohol prohibition. And so this defiance of the law that was the hallmark of our drug war, this bureaucracy that's been created, the DEA and on, this has corrupted law enforcement, it has corrupted government, it has corrupted individuals, and it's given a monopoly to the worst people who continue to make more and more intense forms of whatever it is that they're trying to prohibit. Nevertheless, when we look at Frank Serpico, he was not interested in taking money from the drug people, look the other way. He said, I'm not going to report any of you for taking money. That's your own issue. But they were uncomfortable with him being there. So if you remember the story, he was shot in the face in a staged raid they had there. And he got out of town, but he also testified about it. He has spoken from, I don't think he's back in the United States. I don't know if he's still abroad in Switzerland or whatever. But one of the things that Frank Serpico said, and this is true of any institution, he said, every institution is made up of people. And so as a result, you're going to have good and bad people in that institution. The question is, when the bad people are seen, is the institution going to cover them up and protect them and enfold around them, right? Make them their own? If you do that, then the institution is corrupted. You have to purge the bad people out, or the institution itself is corrupted. And yet we see just the opposite happening in our institutions everywhere, whether you're talking about political institutions, even if you're talking about the Epstein stuff, right? What do we see? The corruption being embraced, being protected, being hidden. And so he said he saw these people who took on powerful institutions and they lived for years with the consequences. He said he had a pronounced sense of right and wrong. He didn't say that, but the person writing the article for Wired who spent some time with him, he did this back in April, did the interviews, and he said, since I started interviewing him back in April, he said, this has really blown up, this resistance against FLoC. But he said, Picardo has a pronounced sense of right and wrong, and he has a tendency to treat compromise as betrayal, because it is. He said, you should never sell your integrity. He's a Christian, so is his wife. So he was thinking, what should I do about this? You know, because he knew that if he said anything about what the police were doing, they would regard it as a betrayal. And so his wife said, well, just do what you think is right and we'll live with the consequences. Both of them were on board with that. And so now he's living with the consequences. But he did the right thing. So he talks to a reporter at the local paper. Their headline was, Pawtucket officer has a big problem with the new cameras. And so it was a pretty strong approach that they took. They took the angle that this guy is leading the charge against the police. So in the article, they have him saying that FLoC is a grave threat to privacy. It is. And he warned that the system was ripe for abuse. And we've seen that over and over again. As I pointed out, we've had a lot of people who have vandalized or damaged or destroyed these things. They've had about in the low 30s, the number of people that have been arrested for that. But in the high 50s, the number of police officers, police chiefs, sheriffs, and so forth, who have abused the system, who have used it to track individuals. In one particular case in Florida, in Key West, a guy had worked a security detail, and he saw a woman at this detail that was an actress, and he was very taken with her. And he tried to pick her up. She was not interested, so he got her license plate, and he started following her everywhere. He nearly had a head-on collision with several vehicles, including a truck, because he tried to follow her and get close to her to pull her over on the narrow bridge that's down in Key West. This is the kind of thing that we've seen. So we've seen a lot more crime from the police than we have from the people who are cutting down these cameras. And wouldn't you think that if people are going to be cutting down cameras, that the cameras would be able to at least solve that problem? But of course, they don't do much for vehicle crime either, as they've seen in Atlanta, where they have a network of 5,000 of these cameras. And yet the crime rate, according to the FBI, has remained flat in some categories, like vehicle crime. They didn't help at all with that. And it's actually gone up in some other areas, some other categories. So He said he had learned of the full deployment from the newspaper itself and not from his own department. He said, if a patrol officer knew as little about these cameras going up around the city as I do, he asked, how much could the public possibly know? He said this whole thing has kind of 1984 vibes. Well, you bet it does. And so I'm not going to go into all the details of what happened to him. Suffice it to say, as this Wired article, if you want to read it, the Wired article has all the details of how they kicked off a series of contrived investigations for the purpose of harassing him, coming from the police chief himself. These investigations went nowhere, and initially he was defended by the police union, but after a while they started just saying, well, we're not going to get involved in that anymore. And so they kept harassing him. They made it clear that he was not welcome there. He got some short suspension out of some of these things. The only thing that came out of it, some short suspension without pay. And so again, he was not shot in the face like Serpico. He wasn't imprisoned in a mental institution like Adrian Schoolcraft, but he paid for this nevertheless. And so eventually what he did was he resigned. But before he resigned, in the very first one of these cases, he's called to appear before the Office of Professional Standards. He said, sits at a table, and across from him is a lieutenant and a sergeant. And then there's a union rep who sat beside him but didn't say anything. The cameras, he said, were tracking people across the city, and the public had a right to know that they were being used. He said the lieutenant disagreed with him. He said, listen to this, not every police tactic, he told Picardo, was the public's business. Oh, really? We're not supposed to look at it? Yeah, because national security, right? You're not supposed to know what they're doing. It's all to protect you, isn't it? No, national security is not about protecting us. The Pentagon is getting into one war after the other. They're creating enemies everywhere. We are very vulnerable here. And you should pay attention to what is happening in Ukraine and Russia, as I pointed out, and pay attention to how vulnerable our infrastructure is. Now, nevertheless, they're not protecting us, but they are keeping things secret from us. They are stealing money from us to make us less safe. And so he said the public doesn't need to, it's not their business what the police department is doing. And we don't disclose every method that we use or every form of surveillance that we have. So investigators accused Picardo of violating the public's trust by speaking to the press. Think about that. You violated the public's trust by speaking to the press? No. He said, he came back and he said, no, this department violated the public's trust. He's absolutely right. So a long series of harassments. After 7 years of being there, again, this went on for 2 years of harassment. It's not going to get any better. He decided that he would resign. He wrote a brief letter. He said policing had meant a great deal to him and his family, but over the previous 3 years, the department had made clear he was no longer welcome because of his philosophical convictions. He said remaining would only bring more grief to him and his family. He did not apologize for speaking out, and he should not have apologized. But after resigning, he said, well, he's going to get a job with another police department, or he'd get a job even working security, private security, campus cop, anything like that. Nobody would give him a job. Many of them would not respond. The ones who responded after they gave him an interview, they would not hire him. And so he had a local college. When he went to a campus security at a local college, he asked around, and they gave him an explanation. They said, you are blackballed. Yeah, that's the purpose of this, isn't it? Isn't the purpose of it to identify people who aren't going to be compliant with the system? You're going to criticize the system. You're going to criticize the vaccines or the mandates or the masks or the 6-foot social distancing. You're going to criticize that kind of stuff? Well, you won't have a job. And once they get enough control, you won't have a place to live. That was what Solzhenitsyn said when he wrote his essay, Live Not by Lies. He said, yes, they'll take your job. They'll kick you out of your home. You'll be on the street. They may even put you in prison like they did him. But he said, don't live by lies. But this is what these people want. And when you look at one of these heinous individuals who is at the top of this, Sam Altman, he describes what he thinks is the perfect surveillance state.
One dystopia that I'm particularly nervous about 10 years from now is we overreact to AI safety. And so we say, look, everyone, you're going to get a cure for cancer. You're going to have material abundance, but you will have no freedom. You will have no agency. It will be a perfect surveillance state. There will be no privacy. And that's what you're going to get. You're going to get great comfort, but there will be nothing left in the world for you to really do. Nothing that really matters. You'll just kind of live at the, service of the AI giving you material wealth.
Giving him material wealth. He's playing the same game that Elon Musk did. He's saying, well, I'm sorry, not Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. He says, yeah, it's going to usher in. If you're concerned about AI and if you put restrictions on AI, let me tell you, that's going to usher in the mark of the beast. It's going to usher in a dystopian surveillance state. They're not going to be the ones who do it, right? No, they are going to be the ones who do it. They've got the government contracts. They're the ones who are working on this. So he said, the author of this Wired article said, since I started speaking with him in April, the debate over FLoC has spread beyond him. It has. We had cities that are fighting over whether or not to keep the camera. Some jurisdictions have canceled contracts in both Republican and Democrat-led states. They push for new limits on how the systems can be used. So it is the biggest bipartisan issue that is out there right now. And yet the Republicans are running as rapidly as they can to the corporate greed. And they are pushing us, by doing that, they are pushing us to socialism and to an authoritarian state. So the country has long attached dreams of freedom and of self-determination to the car, says this author in Wired, and he's absolutely right. He says it's a mythology that is reflected in the advertising and even in the names of the vehicles themselves. Think about it. Explorer, Expedition, Escape, Maverick, Liberty, Miata. Oh wait, that's that's not that. But anyway, mine is my auto is a tiny auto. I guess is what that stands for. Americans who agreed on little else could still recognize the promise of the open road. That for a little while, a person might simply leave and be left alone. This is a threat to that promise, at the very least. Remember, we used to have the commercials. I can't remember what her name was, the singer who said, see the USA in a Chevrolet, right? Now the USA is the United Surveillance State, and it's watching you in the Chevrolet. Wherever you go, the USA is there. You're not going to go everywhere in the USA. They don't want you doing that. But they're going to be watching you. And any criticism of their methods or their policies or even a foreign government that is controlling and pulling the strings of our government, that foreign government being Israel, any of that will get you blackballed. Don't criticize the mask or the rest of the stuff. As a matter of fact, the first charge that they brought against him was to go back several years during the insanity of the lockdowns. And he was working security at a musical that was there. And they wanted him to wear a mask. And he said he wasn't going to wear a mask. And they filed a complaint with him. And that was the very first thing that the police chief brought up. And they got that dismissed easily. Nevertheless, he has deleted, as he points out, his social media accounts years ago. He has little interest in becoming a pundit, but he said there was a time where he was spending nearly 20 minutes a day discussing these license plate readers, surveillance, and the meaning of privacy. And so said podcasters reaching out to him, the Washington Post and many others. And many people were pushing him to start his own podcast because of the rampant buildup of resistance against FLoC cameras. But he said, I started thinking about this. The only reason people know who I am, he said, is because I criticized something. But he was right to criticize this. As we all know, the old saying, and it's true. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing, to not even say anything. How can you not speak out when you see this kind of evil being put in? And he said, So he said, I'm worried that you might begin with sincere convictions about serving the public. Then you begin tracking your audience. And in time, he said, you become a parody of what you believe and what you were before. I've seen that. I've seen that in people who chase audience and people who chase money. It's one of the reasons why I just had somebody recently ask me, how big is your audience? And I said, I really don't know. I go out of my way not to look anymore. I don't post the stuff up. I don't look to see if anybody's looking. And to me, that's a trap. I saw that trap at InfoWars with Alex Jones. You get focused on audience and money. Forget about it. It's going to control what you have to say. So I don't want to look at that. I barely look at the money. As you all know, I don't talk about that too much. But probably should talk about it more. But I definitely don't want to know how's my audience doing from day to day. That is a trap. I've been in that trap at InfoWars, and I don't want to be a part of that. And you do become a parody of what you were. So he said his mind returned to Matthew. What profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? And that's how they end the article. It's a man of conviction, and he should not be ashamed of those convictions. I just have to say, when we look at it, especially what happened through COVID and all the people who were losing their jobs left and right because they wouldn't kowtow to the demands. You have United Airlines now wants to take to the Supreme Court a case where employees were saying, we're not going to go with a mandate, and say, okay, well, you're fired. And one of the lawyers who was representing the employee said, well, we may lose on these other issues over here, informed consent and all the rest of this stuff. But there is a rock-solid case here, at least at this point in time in the U.S., for your religious convictions. And remember, we were told in the Bible, and I've seen it myself. I was young, now I'm old. I've never seen the righteous, some translations will say the godly, forsaken, nor their children begging bread. And I got to say that what I saw after this nightmare that Trump kicked off for us and handed it over to Biden to finish it up, that should really concern you. When Trump is kicking off this militarized police state, ignoring posse comitatus, he's talking about putting killer robots at the border. I know that sounds crazy, but the company that wants to do that is putting out press releases saying, hey, we're talking to people in Homeland Security. That company is allied with Eric Trump. So what do you think the chances are that they're going to actually buy a bunch of this stuff and do something like that? You should be very concerned about what Trump is preparing. He is President Trump. He prepares these things, and he's going to be handing it off to leftist socialists because he is there to be as obnoxious and as chaotic as possible so they can offer you an alternative. Somebody like Jon Ossoff, very calm, very rational sounding, about as hard left as you can find. As I said yesterday, he gets a 5 out of 100 in terms of the Freedom Index, following the Constitution from the John Birch Society. He's about as left-wing and he was 0 for his first couple of terms in Congress. All of that movement to get him up to 5% came from averaging in the last 3 years because he's made a big pivot to the center in terms of being able to run for president. So you need to think about that. You need to think about what you're going to do to stand up for liberty. We'll be right back, folks. Stay with us.
But unlike most revolutions where the people rise against a real economic oppression, in our case here in Boston, we are fighting for purely an abstract principle.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
It is, however, not nearly so abstract as the young gentleman supposes. The issue involved here is one of monopoly. Today, the British government will monopolize the sale of tea in our country. Tomorrow, it will be something else.
listening to The David Knight Show.
Right, and as one of our listeners has said, this is the surveillance state of data centers and flock cameras and all many other aspects of it as well. This is our Boston Tea Party. Yeah, the hatred for the data centers are so powerful, we now have our first commercials bashing them, says Daily Caller. This is a couple of Liquid Death, which makes canned water, and Garage Beer teams up with NFL legend, they say, Jason Kelce. He is the brother of the guy who married Taylor Swift. Just for reference, in case you're like me and you don't follow football. They have launched a new ad campaign that's spoofing the amount of water that AI data centers continue to use to keep their computers cool. The campaign is dubbed "We Want Your Pee," and they say this is a PSA. Kelce and the co-owner of Garage Beer put this thing together. He said, AI data centers waste millions of gallons of water, says Kelce, who is sitting on a toilet, filling up a bottle with his urine. He tells the camera, "We want your pee. Please give us your pee." And then he finishes up by saying, "Let's pee on a computer together to save humanity." Yeah, that might be what we actually need to do. Who knows? I like technology. I don't like the way technology is being used. Wall Street Journal says this pushback against police state tyranny is Luddites who don't like technology. I don't like technology being used as an instrument of tyranny. That's what I don't like. And I have seen that many times in my career. I didn't want to participate in that, and I don't want to be a victim of that either. Americans are destroying license plate cameras as the surveillance backlash grows. They've been shot, spray painted, cut down, and how-to videos are spreading online. Said one suspect, people are fed up. And yet, when you look at what is happening in Norman, Oklahoma, I guess, might be normal Oklahoma. The city council did not want to have flock cameras. Nevertheless, they got them because the police department wanted them. Not the police department, but the sheriff did. They control the police department, but they don't control the sheriff's office. So the sheriff's office was the one that was the offender in this particular case. And remember, though, that you can vote for sheriff. But the county commissioners were also for it. And then there are home associations who want it. And this is one of the aspects of this that is the most uncontrollable. This is like the Ring cameras. Anybody can put a Ring camera on their front door. And Amazon got into a lot of hot water when they said they were going to connect these Ring cameras to the police and sell them the data and that type of thing. But of course, a lot of people are voluntarily giving that information to them. Same thing happens with private individuals. You can have, in one of the instances where a guy who was a whistleblower who used to work as an installer for Flock, he said, the one that's here, he said, that's the first one that I put up. And it's in front of a mosque. And they wanted it there. And then they do a deal with Flock where Flock can grab all the data. So when you have these individuals, it can be a homeowners association, or it could be a police department or a sheriff's department. It could be the city council, or it could be the commissioner. They go to any of these sources to get their cameras put up. That's how they've gone from 400 3 years ago to 120,000 now. They know that if they get the wrong answer, if they get a no from somebody at one of these areas, they can go to all these other areas and still put together their surveillance network. We have to have some legislators who are going to ban the way this information is used. And I think the best approach, the only thing that works, is the bribery and blackmail out of Washington. Nobody cares about constitutional principles. Nobody cares about law. They find a workaround about any of that kind of stuff. So when Thomas Massie addressed this, what he had to say was, well, let's pass a bill saying that if you got a police department or a sheriff's office or a city council or a county commission, if they put these things in, they're going to lose some federal funding. That, folks, is really the only mechanism that is going to stop that at the local level. Because they are hell-bent to put this stuff in. Let's take a look at what is happening in terms of in terms of Trump's war here. We have a situation where we got record ground beef prices. Of course, that happens and you start seeing the food prices go up. Is it the problem of the grocery stores? Is it the problem of the farmers? No, the farmers are going out of business left and right. Trump has done many things in terms of raising the cost of fuel, creating tariffs, causing the farmers to lose business that they were selling to China and so forth. And instead, it goes to his Zionist ally in Argentina, Javier Milei. It is a K-shaped economy, and it is buckling, says Zero Hedge. With national average gas prices still above $4 a gallon, we got diesel headed to $6, nearly there in many places. Discretionary spending is weakening. Consumer stress is now surfacing in the grocery aisle. As beef prices hover near record highs, Americans are beginning to trade down to cheaper proteins. Beef sale volume declined during 13 weeks through mid-July. Volumes had risen about 5% during the same period in each of the previous 2 years because this is peak grilling season. Yeah, that's right. People are going out and buying hamburgers to grill, but now they can't because hamburgers are coming up to a record $7 a pound. Isn't that astounding? By the way, if you do want to grill, I would recommend that you get American Home Products. Go to eBay, and we're going to put the link there since they have moved their website completely under eBay. You can find things. We love the mesquite that they have to start barbecue grills. And
the tumbleweeds.
Yeah, sorry, I said mesquite, didn't I? Yeah, it's tumbleweeds. Sorry, it's a big. It's
another deserty plant.
Big difference there, isn't it? But it's the tumbleweeds, tumbleweeds, and they're a great fire starter. And he's got some real innovative uses for natural products that you'll find, and you can find them at eBay now, American Home Products. And so when you look at what is happening, $7 a pound, a record high. That's what Trump has done. Thank you, Trump, for all of this. Yeah, America first? No, not really. And one of the reasons that this is happening is because cattle herds are near the lowest level in more than 5 decades. As a matter of fact, we got meat processing plants. I saw a video of the massive number of people that were losing their jobs in a meat packing plant because it's just being shut down. They said, we don't have enough cattle to bring the meat in, so we're reducing our operation. All those people losing their jobs. But I didn't play the video for you because it's just a lot of people that are kind of angry and mulling around. There's nothing being said, no context for that. But that is what's happening. They want to push us to Soylent Green food, don't they? And that is, they want to push us to lab meat that Bill Gates wants to sell. That's one way to do it, to make sure you don't have the real stuff. Just in the same way that they're getting rid of the penny, next the nickel. So if you don't have cash, if they don't print the money, right, if they don't coin the coins, then you are cashless by default, aren't you? Demand destruction levels for beef may finally be hitting as people stop buying at these record prices. Maybe they'll move to cheaper proteins like pork and chicken, except they've done their best to try to raise the price of chicken, haven't they, as well, with all the bird flu nonsense. Trump is playing a dangerous game of chicken, by the way. We can't eat that, but it's going to make things more expensive what we do eat. Trump told his administration envoys to stop talks with Iran on Tuesday. CNN reported that Trump officials have told allies they have shifted their strategy from hammer Iran as soon as possible to strangle them over time. And of course, I played the clip for you yesterday where Trump says, well, I'm not in a hurry. I got plenty of time to do this. He also says, these people on the USS Lincoln, they haven't been there long enough, even though it's record deployment. Not nearly long enough, he said. They should be staying there longer. So we should all stay in this war for a very long time. Now we are going to strangle them economically. Who's strangling who? Right? Depends, I guess, on what your goals are and where your loyalty lies. And we know where his loyalty lies. Yeah, he's in no hurry. By definition, folks, that's a quagmire, isn't it? He doesn't have too many options except to just try to maintain the status quo as long as he can. And what's going to happen is a global depression. He may be stalling for time because he needs some more time to rebuild all the weapons that they have used. Who's going to pay for that? You and I. We'll pay for that along with higher gas prices, higher food prices, you name it. Senator Richard Blumenthal, a Democrat, said Trump has reached a strategic dead end. I think we all see that. He has involved this nation in a seemingly endless, costly war, just as the USS Abraham Lincoln is on an endless, seemingly indefinite deployment with no exit. The idea that he would strangle Iran seems like magical thinking. Yeah, he believes his own memes, doesn't he? He called out Trump for a lack of strategy and for the cost of the war, from gas and groceries to a worldwide economic backlash. Yeah, Trump is the guy to accelerate this fourth turning into a greater depression and a World War III. So many people, as New American is pointing out, are very concerned about how Mark Levin keeps pushing for a nuclear war against Iran. The headline from New American: Fox talker Levin again slyly suggests using nuclear weapons on Iran. And his proximity to Trump is a reason to be alarmed about this. Anybody could talk about this kind of stuff. We've seen a lot of people who have. Jonathan Pollard, for example, he has given one interview after the other inside of Israel to people and saying, yeah, we need to hit him first with an EMP, then we need to drop nuclear weapons on him. And in these interviews where he's trying to normalize the use of nuclear weapons, it's just another tool in our arsenal, right? Jonathan Pollard, the worst traitor to America. He was born American, but his identity was Jewish. He was a trans Jew, I guess. Again, I look at these people who they've created this horrific, genocidal, racist state, and it's all based on their ethnicity. And yet they aren't and can't prove that they are ethnic Jews. They are trans Jews. They identify as Jews, these Ashkenazi do. So neoconservative podcaster Mark Levin, whom Trump has implicitly confessed plays a major role in his decision-making, has again slyly suggested the U.S. should attack Iran with a nuclear weapon. Jonathan Pollard brags about how Israel blackmailed the U.S. with a threat of a nuclear attack on Egypt to get us to give them weapons for the 1973 war. We did that. We succumbed to that nuclear blackmail from our greatest ally. And what did we get? Well, we got blessed with the 1973 oil embargo, which, even though that was only directed against the United States, and even though the United States only got 15% of its oil from those Gulf states, that set off a worldwide economic issue in 1973. Now what Trump has done is, with the Trump oil embargo, we have taken not 15% of the U.S.'s oil, but we've taken offline essentially 20% of the world's oil offline. Levin again cited high casualties during World War II and cheered the fact that Harry Truman vaporized Hiroshima and Nagasaki in early August 1945. Levin said Iran will not surrender to the United States. Then he ominously asked, "Remember Japan?" Levin's commentary would be meaningless if he didn't have the president's ear. But he thinks that that was necessary. And it was not necessary. Even if they were not on the verge of surrendering, which is what all of the high military officials, including President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the chief Allied commander at the time, he and many other generals, and I'll tell you here their names here in just a minute, were saying that Japan was on the ropes. They were looking for a way to surrender, and it was absolutely unnecessary. And folks, it was illegal in terms of international law. It was immoral based on God's law to attack civilians. I've said many times, if you think it was necessary to end the war that way, because you don't want to go from island to island having another Iwo Jima, then drop it on the soldiers that are fighting. I mean, that's a war, right? But you don't attack civilians, especially with nuclear weapons. That's what Mark Levin wants to do. He said, Tojo was very stubborn. He was very headstrong. Unfortunately, we had to drop 2 atomic bombs until they would surrender. Now, obviously, we're not going to do that now. But then he said, maybe that's the way that you end this thing, right? After America First podcaster Megyn Kelly attacked Levin in March, Trump embarked on a jihad against the Israel First chicken hawks critics, writes the New American. Those who disagree with Levin have far less intellect, capability, and love for our country, said Trump. And he's right. What he doesn't tell you is what our country is. Trump's country and Levin's country is Israel, not America. And so Levin ate up all the flattery. And yet the reality is that Dwight Eisenhower, the five-star Supreme Allied Commander, said, I was against it for two reasons. First, the Japanese were ready to surrender, and it wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing. Second, I hated to see our country be the first to use such a weapon. He was a guy who seemed to have a moral character. And he was the one who warned us about the military-industrial complex as well. And then you had War Secretary Henry Stimson wrote that he had grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. Secondly, I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by the use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. So Levin knows better. He knows better than Eisenhower, who was the commander. He knows better than Secretary of War Henry Stimson. He knows better than five-star Admiral William Leahy, who was the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during World War II. He said basically the same thing in his memoir. I was there. Hey, Levin, he was there. Maybe you should read what he had to say. He said the use of this barbarous weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. He added the Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender. We had adopted an ethical standard common to the barbarians of the Dark Ages, common to the barbarians of the state of Israel, that terrorist, genocidal, racist regime. He said, I was not taught to make war in that kind of fashion. Wars cannot be won by destroying women and children. But Israel thinks it can, and they are paying the price for that. As a matter of fact, Rahm Emanuel, who is Jewish himself, just went to Israel, and he spoke to a member of the press there, and he explained to them why they are international pariahs now, because their morality is so divorced from any quote-unquote Judeo-Christian values. They don't value the values and the laws of Moses. They reject Christ. They're so morally cauterized, they don't even understand why people see their actions as abhorrent.
Israel has a problem in America, and very specifically, a generational problem under 30. I don't know if you saw this, but there's a poll out today. Mandani is more popular with American Jews than your prime minister. I want that to sink in and understand and get your head around where this is. This isn't, oh, we have a dispute. What has happened and the way the prime minister, in my view, has conducted Israel's both national security, not just this war, it's national security overall, has led Israel into a dead end and has put the alliance at a tipping point. Today, Israel is a pariah. Israel's lost the United States. It's lost Europe, and you picked up Somaliland. As my mother would say, such a deal. You've lost your economic market, you've lost your political patron, and you picked up Somaliland.
Yeah, but they own our politicians. They own the GOP, which I guess we should call it the ZOP, the Zionist-owned politicians. Yeah, they finished this by saying, this is New American, they've got the quotes again from Dwight Eisenhower, the commander, the War Secretary Henry Stimson, five-star admiral who was chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of them saying it was not necessary. They had lost the war. We didn't want to do something that was morally abhorrent. We did not want to destroy women and children. Even Admiral Bull Halsey said the first atomic bomb was an unnecessary experiment. And yet Mark Levin said, quote, we had to drop 2 atomic bombs until they would surrender. That is a lie. That is a lie that we have been taught in school by the people who want the national security state. But Marjorie Taylor Greene was right when she said it is pure evil, the idea that the Trump administration is considering nuclear attacks on Iran. She made a dramatic accusation, this is a LifeSite News article, over the weekend, that the Trump administration is considering a pure evil decision to use nuclear weapons against Iran as the president struggles to disentangle the United States from his war on the Islamic terror regime. Let's understand what we need to disentangle ourselves from is this terrorist state of Israel. There are discussions about using nuclear weapons on Iran in strategy meetings, said Marjorie Taylor Greene on Sunday. Yes, you read that correctly. It's real. I'm not speculating. I know. And it is pure evil. She's absolutely right about that. It is pure evil. Her speculation about Trump using nuclear weapons against Iran has an air of plausibility because of his increasingly erratic behavior, says LifeSite News, and because of the things that he has threatened. Remember when he said, tonight, whole civilization will die if they don't do this. That was widely interpreted as a threat of using nuclear weapons. He also has been put up against the wall. We see him spinning left and right, trying to lie his way out of the quagmire that he's put himself in. When this whole thing began, I did, if you remember, I did a Brer Rabbit cartoon with an AI that had Trump's face on it, and he was stuck with a tar baby. And that's exactly the way I saw this, stuck with a tar baby. And at the very beginning, we had people like Colonel McGregor and Scott Ritter who were telling us exactly what was happening in terms of the Iranian strategy. They said, we look at what they're doing, and you look at what we're doing. They've got a strategy. We don't have a strategy. What we're doing makes absolutely no sense. So Trump using nuclear weapons does have an air of plausibility, unfortunately, because we're talking about Trump. It wouldn't if you were talking about anybody else. Many noting that Trump has so far been unwilling to commit to fully eliminating the regime's current leaders, appears fearful of escalating the conflict so close to midterm elections, so maybe he'll wait until after. For the time being, at least, shifting to a focus on economic pressure, hoping that the economic pressure that Americans are feeling because of his idiotic actions isn't going to cause him and the Republican Party to lose big time. Again, when you look at all the different issues, she broke with him over Epstein. She broke with him also over his Iran assassination strikes, because I think that is also a reprehensible policy. He thinks it's reprehensible. He thinks that if anybody assassinates him, that we ought to, wipe out that civilization. He said it more than once that Iran needs to be wiped out as a civilization. One reason would be if they kill him. But it's okay for him to assassinate their top military leader, their top leader, to try to eliminate all of them. And he did say, well, when we eliminated the Ayatollah, we wanted regime change, but we don't really have many options because we killed all the other people that we would have wanted as well. How about that? So we have seen the Epstein cover-up. We have seen gas prices skyrocket. We have seen tariff price inflation, food inflation, war, and now his open contempt for sailors on the USS Abraham Lincoln. What is it going to take for MAGA to finally wake up and look at this guy? And they're the only ones who support him in any of this stuff. So overwhelmingly, 80% of the people in America are against what Trump is doing. It's only in self-identified MAGA people. These are people who still love this guy, who will still buy anything with his name or face on it, and they support anything that he does because they have nothing that they're looking at, no principle, no policy, nothing. They just idolize this reprehensible figure. Real Clear Politics polling shows the Iran war is deeply unpopular. 61% disapprove of it, but other polling shows that nearly 90% of self-identified MAGA supporters approve of the strikes. Again, it's just idolatry. And that brings us to Randy Fine. I've got a tip here from Stealth Patriot. Thank you so much for that. He says, and Randy Swine wins his primary. Voting is the equivalent of writing a letter to Santa. Well, that's a good analogy. I would just say, though, if you write a letter to Santa, you might actually get something, not from Santa, but from your parents. But you're not going to get anything from these people. It'll all go to Israel. As a matter of fact, one of the interesting things that came up with Randy Fine in the very last day was the fact that as he was going around knocking on doors in his district, a Ring camera caught him. Here's the video of it. TMZ got it. There he knocks on the door, rings a bell, and then looks at the mailbox that's there, and he starts rummaging through their mail. Isn't this an apt metaphor for the entire Zionist surveillance state that they want here? He doesn't have any reason to look through these people's mail, but he's going to do it anyway. And go through that, yeah. So a lot of people are saying, that's a felony, that's a felony. Well, it's not a felony, I guess, because he didn't take anything out, and it's not a crime because the homeowner doesn't want to go up against this guy who has a history of taking vengeance on anybody who comes against him. Again, remember, he is a Zionist, and that is the way they operate. But what he is doing is basically the same thing that this official at Oracle was boasting about doing. I played this for you yesterday. It's worth it to take another look at this. This is Oracle talking about the Zionist technocrats and how they want to examine everything that you do. And she was talking about how she was filled with pride when she was in Israel and saw these people in Israeli uniforms. She's Jewish herself. And she thinks that they're entitled to do whatever they wish to you. And she boasted about the fact, well, you know, we have some amazing technology. I can't tell you about it. I can't tell you how we're using it. The same kind of reprehensible stuff we see from Jonathan Pollard, who, even though he's talking about how they did nuclear blackmail to the United States, threatening to nuke Egypt, he said, yeah, we just told them to look at this plane. There's some very special weapons on there. You know what I mean? Big weapons. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
You hit our website in an Arab country, and you saw your entire screen filled with an Israeli flag, which said, not only we stand with Israel, we stand with our employees in Israel, we stand with the people of Israel, we stand with the military establishment of Israel. There's a few things that we did that I really can't talk about, to be honest, because to advance the agenda for the Israeli military. But our teams did a lot. We have some really profoundly scary technology at Oracle, and we wanted to make sure that it was available for the effort. Let's just say that. Okay? I was in the curiosity.
Disgusting.
And I go in.
This is the executive chair of Oracle.
Imagine I meet with. And
Sarah
on
Katz.
my way out, I run into, 5 of my team who are all in uniform working. And to be honest with you, it's like my proudest moment.
Yeah, your proudest moment. To be a part of the Israeli Defense Force, that's what Oracle is. It's reprehensible, I think, quite frankly. But, you know, we're going to take a look at what happened with the election. He got some really stiff opposition from Dan Bilzerian, and there are accusations of voter rigging as well as accusations against both Bilzerian and against Randy Fine. We're going to take a quick break, however, and we will be right back. Stay with us.
the globalists' next move. And now, the David Knight Show.
Welcome back. Yeah, so let's talk about the campaign between these two guys. As I pointed out yesterday, Randy Swine making an outrageous claim that his opponent was getting $1 million from perhaps, we don't know, but perhaps it's from some foreign interference from another country. This is a guy who is one of the darlings of AIPAC and the Israelis. You want to talk about foreign interference? He is the poster child for that. And yet he tried to project that onto Dan Bilzerian. He said he's been blatantly anti-Semitic. Let me just say that you are allowed to criticize a foreign government. You're allowed to criticize politicians who have been bought by a foreign government. What Randy Fine did was to try to inoculate himself against charges of being owned by a foreign government that everybody knows he is, by claiming that his opponent was owned by a foreign government. And so we got a foreign government, by the way, that is not only looting America, but sending our sons to die in a war. This is criticism of this racist, genocidal government is not racism itself. And that's the way that they manipulate these contents. But of course, there were some things that, you look at Dan Bilzerian, as we pointed out, he was an influencer for a long time, pretty women in bikinis on his yachts and a lot of these other things, not somebody that I would necessarily support. He's also put out some things hinting that he supports Hitler, for example, which I think is over the top. I mean, you can certainly criticize Israel for their Zionist policies without embracing Hitler. Hitler was not a good guy. I criticize what Trump is doing with Iran, but I don't support any of the Ayatollahs or that government as well. There's no reason to go into that and to make champions out of them. Just criticize what is wrong. And so, again, the vile attack against Congressman Randy Fine in Florida are disgusting and should be condemned by all political leaders on the right and the left, said Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, who, just like the race mongers of the left, no debate on any of this stuff. You're not allowed to criticize Israel. If you do, we're going to call you racist. Where do we see that tactic before? Over and over again, I've had situations, you go to one of these protests, what do the people on the left always do? They always call you racist because they are obsessed with race. That's what Israel does as well. And oh, by the way, I believe because they have told us that they did this. They've bragged about the fact that they took over the institutions. The Jews have marched through the Zionists, let's say. The Zionists have marched through the institutions at the top. That is a Marxist tactic from Antonio Gramsci, the guy that Pete Buttigieg's father made a career studying at Notre Dame. They understood that. They understood it was more effective to go through the institutions. And that's exactly what they have done. They've taken over universities. They've taken over media and entertainment. They've taken over government. They bribed their way to controlling our Congress. And so you're not allowed to talk about any of that stuff. And yet, what did they do when they got control of that? Well, they're the ones who came up with critical race theory, CRT stuff. The idea that anybody who opposes them is racist. Or the transgender stuff. The other tactic that Randy Fine and these other people are saying is that if you criticize what Israel is doing, then you're criticizing all Jewish people. And that kind of hate speech, they call it, is actually violence. That's the tactic that these same people instituted in the institutions at the top in terms of defending transgenders. So if some male thinks that he's a woman, you have to play along with his fantasy. If he thinks that he's Napoleon, you salute and you march to his orders, right? And if these people think that they are Jews, ethnic Jews, when they're not, then you have to play along with their transgender fantasy, because if you don't, your refusal to play along with that fantasy is now considered to be hate, and it is considered to be violence. So that is the rules that we see. Then we see who are making those rules, and we see who made these rules for the LGBT, for the CRT stuff, and all the rest of the stuff. It is a Marxist tactic. It is a Bolshevik tactic. Let's understand that as well. So Randy Fine escapes criminal charges after rifling through that voter's mailbox. The person did not want to press charges, and it's not a federal case because he didn't take anything from it. But he has triggered outrage in the past for saying that Gaza should be nuked. Oh, here we are. Another Zionist calling for the use of nuclear weapons. Whether it's Gaza or whether it's Iran, they need to be nuked. Just like Japan was in World War II. Mark Levin, Randy Fine, Jonathan Pollard, they may not be ethnically related, but they are definitely politically related. They are wolves in sheep's clothing, not sheep, but in the clothing of the Republican Party. The Zionists are despicable criminals, folks. And when you look at this election that happened yesterday, Dan Bilzerian is claiming that there was something fishy about this. When you look at the votes, the 7:30 vote, when they had the polls closed, it shows that you have Randy Fine at, it's a little bit small, I can't see it there. Can you make that larger, Travis? He was under 50%, and Dan Bilzerian was pretty close to him at that point in time. But the key thing is that he had 8,000 votes, over 8,000 votes, and Randy Fine had 10,000. Then later, you see that when they get the final results in there, can you make that larger, Travis? I'm having trouble seeing that. When you get the results in, you see that Randy Fine goes over 50%, and the key thing is that he picked up apparently all of the remaining votes. And not only that, but he took some votes from Dan Bilzerian as well. So at 7:30, Dan Bilzerian is over 8,000 votes. And then when the thing ends, he is down to 6,300. Meanwhile, Randy Fine goes from about 8,000 votes to 19,000 votes. So his vote total doubles, but Bilzerian's goes down by 25%. That's kind of interesting. And this is all being channeled. These are screenshots from NBC News, but of course they're not doing this information. They're getting it from the Board of Elections. So yeah, it does look fishy. This is why the listener just said you might as well write a letter to Santa Claus. I don't trust elections. I've seen how many different ways they rigged this. So again, Fine was part of an unholy trinity, by the way, to attack the First Amendment. When you go back to the episode of what DeSantis did, remember DeSantis took a law that was put together by these Republicans, Mike Caruso, Randy Fine, got this thing pushed through. And the three of them, this unholy trinity, goes to Israel to sign a bill that would attack anybody who criticizes Israel in violation of the First Amendment that all these people swore to uphold as a condition of their office. And so he goes to Israel to sign a bill in Florida that is going to shut down the First Amendment for criticism of a foreign government. He goes to that foreign government. He signs it. He gives the pen to Netanyahu. That's what Ron DeSantis did. Well, what did Mike Caruso do? Well, Mike Caruso was just arrested yesterday. He was the county clerk in Palm Beach. He also forced the Palm Beach residents to invest $1 billion in Israeli bonds. 18% of the county's total portfolio he put into Israel. I mean, you see one country after the other. If you want to do business with the state of Florida, if you want to do business with the state of Arkansas, where Mike Huckabee's daughter is governor, you have to sign that you basically a loyalty oath with Israel, saying you don't criticize them, you don't boycott them, and so forth, or you won't be able to do any business with the state. That's how they have taken over our government. It is a Zionist-occupied government. But then turning to Mike Caruso, not only did he put in, a fifth of the county's budget, or portfolio, I should say, invested into Israel, but then he was just accused of molesting 2 generations of his family members. Child molestation. And interestingly enough, he was a proponent of the new pedophile law in Florida. He said, of course, under that pedophile law, he could face execution for these crimes if tried and convicted. But we all know what he'll do. He'll get on a plane and he'll fly to Israel because Israel welcomes Jewish pedophiles. What does that tell you about that state? The only country where a pedophile can be welcomed openly is in Israel. And so that's what Caruso is all about. Yet, when we look at the censorship bill, when it first happened, he was confronted on the censorship for the state of Israel. He was confronted by this reporter.
Hello, I'm here with Representative Mike Caruso from Palm Beach. And where exactly in Palm Beach is it?
District 87. I run from Manalapan all the way to Jupiter.
All right, awesome. And Representative Caruso, you have introduced a bill. We're here at the Republican Jewish Coalition's DeSantis and Ben Shapiro event. You have introduced a bill to fight anti-Semitism. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, it's HB 269. What it does is it makes acts of anti-Semitism a hate crime, and it's something that we were called to speak out. We were called to stand up for the 6 million Jews that were murdered by Hitler's Nazi regime. And
yeah, right. This is the guy just arrested for being a pedophile to his own family members.
670
2 generations of
Jews that live in our state of Florida. And, I won't sit still. I won't be.
He's a victim.
I won't do nothing. If we do nothing about this acts of anti-Semitism that are all over, from projections on buildings of Nazi swastikas to destruction of Jewish cemeteries to handing out pamphlets with hate messages on them, if we do nothing, we're going to have 1933's Nazi Germany all over again. And so
you are the Nazis.
I sponsored HB 269, and what it does is it makes acts of anti-Semitism when done in connection with another crime, such as littering or projection on the buildings or defacement through graffiti of cemeteries and all, makes it a third-degree felony punishable by 5 years in prison.
I agree with you on that, that it's about how bad that anti-Semitism is. Some people have concerns about First Amendment, though. That your bill talks about handing out flyers, and aren't messages, even if they are hateful, horrible, horrific messages, don't we in America have a right to print out our opinion and to hand out flyers?
Absolutely, we do. And the First Amendment concern was my number one concern.
Yeah, right.
And we've gone through the bill with Constitution attorneys, and we have an amendment that we're proposing to the bill. But understand, handing out flyers with a hateful message is First Amendment right to everybody. It's when you just go through neighborhoods and discard them on the ground. Okay, that's a crime. That's a littering crime. Okay, and that won't be tolerated, especially if it involves a.
Well, they have littered Gaza with bodies, haven't they? Bodies of children. You just had Ben Gvir talked about it yesterday. 30 to 40 people a day need to be assassinated in Gaza, he said. How many times have we talked about the children that were targeted? As many of the doctors who were treating them said, it's like they're playing a game. All the kids are shot on the left shoulder today. So they're deliberately playing with these people. They're assassinating children. And if you're wondering why this is all happening, you might want to talk to Rahm Emanuel. He's Jewish. He says Israel is a pariah now because we see what you're doing. That's why people are putting these hateful messages out there. You're not going to change what you're doing, though, are you? You're going to double down, triple down. Now you want to go to nuclear weapons as well. Just amazing. Meanwhile, this guy who is so concerned about doing the right thing is raping his own children. 2 generations of them. Despicable. But, of course, Israel will take him in. They like people like that. Somebody they can use. The Pentagon is weighing a permanent, smaller U.S. presence in the Gulf. Just don't call it a retreat, says Zero Hedge. The Washington Post reviews the damage control underway as the Pentagon evaluates its future military footprint. They framed it as if Washington has a choice and has full control over the matter. Yet, Trump is woefully underestimating what Iranian response would look like. Clearly, what is going to happen with this is they're going to pull back. They can't defend themselves from Iran. This is something, as I pointed out at the very beginning, people like retired Colonel McGregor, as well as Scott Ritter, talking about the fact that they had very effectively targeted bases and radar installations, and the U.S. bases had to be abandoned because they were no longer defensible. Where are they going to go? Well, most likely they will go to Israel. That's the only country that we're interested in defending anyway, right? This is a once-in-a-generation chance for the Pentagon to alter its presence in the region, said one analyst. The whole thing is being reported as if the smart people are in the room and in control, as if the U.S. hegemon in the region didn't already take a massive reputational hit following their forever wars and occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan. After 20 years of invasions, the Taliban remains in firm control of Kabul and Afghanistan, and Shiite, that is pro-Iranian politicians, are running Baghdad. So now, a half year into this war, where the response should have been entirely anticipated, having been predicted by years and decades of Persian Gulf wargaming and intelligence papers, this is where things stand. The war really did highlight the vulnerability of U.S. forces in the region, said one analyst. Moving troops and equipment further west to Jordan, Israel, or the Red Sea coast of Saudi Arabia could help alleviate some of the pressure. Yet, Iran has already demonstrated that it can strike faraway targets in Jordan and Israel. Last month, an Iranian attack in Jordan killed 4 U.S. service members. For smarter and more legitimate analysis, one can turn to Americanets, which 1 month ago was chronicling Tehran's successful campaign of what they called debasification. The broad picture of the Iranian war in this phase has been a steady wave of concentrated missile and drone strikes sweeping its way across the region, in contrast to the previous hot phase of the war in which Iran targeted bases across the entire theater simultaneously. This wave started with the targets close to Iranian shores and has progressed steadily to the Israeli border. After destroying much of the radar network protecting regional U.S. Axis bases in the previous hot phase of the war, Iran's planners have prioritized targeting fuel storage, drone hangars, refueling tankers, and barracks. If the American response has been to pull assets back even further from Iran to bases in Israel and Jordan, we'll call this process debasification. Iran's debasification strategy takes advantage of the inherent asymmetry between these widely different military forces. By all available evidence, the Iranian debasification campaign appears to be working. The U.S. forces in this region are likely incapable of generating the same combat power in its air operations against Iran as it could when the war started. Things are trending even further in a negative direction. There is no clear solution on the horizon, which is another reason why we should be concerned about this erratic, uncontrollable temper of Trump and the people who control him, the people who constantly push for nuclear war. The most obvious lever for American planners to pull is to accept more casualties and losses of personnel and airframes, but this is an unprecedented step that the modern incarnation of the U.S. military has never faced before. The Iranians know all this full well, and probably earlier than the Western public did. Again, it was McGregor and Scott Ritter who said this 1 week after this all began. And so this is where we are today, as a matter of fact. This is Colonel McGregor today.
That apparently Mark Levin and this man Dubowitz, who leads the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, which many of us used to refer to as the Foundation for the Destruction of Everything. They're heavily funded by wealthy Jewish Zionists who are also, fronting for Israel and their own, what they call community interests. I don't know why they just don't change their name to something like La Raza. That's pretty obvious. It says we're about the race. Might as well say the same thing about these organizations. But the point I'm trying to make is, what are people like Mark Levin and Dubovitz talking to Admiral Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM? What role do they have? Well, I'm being told, or Tucker says, they've been sent down there to advise the admiral. Now, unless the president of the United States personally called me,
this is why we have problems.
I want you to talk to. And that happens during World War II. MacArthur was asked as a personal favor by FDR to meet with LBJ, who later became president. LBJ was a congressman. There's more to the story, but the bottom line is MacArthur said, yes, absolutely, Mr. President. Now, maybe the president called Cooper and said, I would like you to talk to these two people. But barring that, I wouldn't let them on base. It's absurd. Who are these people?
Yeah.
And they're being sent to advise the admiral. I think the admiral should pay more attention to what's happening aboard ship right now in the Indian Ocean. So, I mean, this kind of thing tells me we're worse than bankrupt. We've lost our balance, our sense of understanding. We are not fighting the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is not an existential fight. We're simply doing this because wealthy Jews in the United States who support Israel have managed to get control of our government and have said, we want the U.S. Armed Forces to fight for Israel. That's what we're doing.
That's right. And I can imagine, when Mark Levin, who is so impressive, I mean, we see people like this sex toy merchant, Rabbi Shumley Boteach. He gets an audience with the Vatican. What is going on with that, right? And so then Mark Levin goes to give military advice to some people. We're in big trouble, aren't we? And I can imagine what Mark Levin said to him.
I'll fight them to the last American. Die for Israel.
Yeah, that's Mark Levin's advice. Go die for Israel. So will the U.S. rebuild bases battered by the Iranian strikes? Well, Tehran is now saying that in essence it won't let that happen. The Washington Post article operates under the illusory assumption that U.S. planners have some big array of options that are set before them, when increasingly American forces are in obvious retreat and no one can do anything about it. Also, whatever happened to War Pete's rah-rah epic fury press briefings on all the winning and all the chest thumping? It's been a while since we've seen that, hasn't it? Says Zero Hedge. Yeah, this high school football coach routine, going through this at a pep rally, has gotten kind of difficult to sustain versus reality, hasn't it? Well, let's talk about the reality of what Trump is doing in economic warfare. Again, we don't have geopolitics, we've got ego politics. We don't have economics, we have egonomics. And here's Exhibit A. You've got U.S. and Canadian officials are holding last-minute talks to try to stop Trump's 50% tariffs on Canada. Yeah, his tariff tantrums. That's what he did. Trump did this. This is absolutely insane. This is yet another tax. And when I look at this, he spent this last weekend putting out memes of himself with George Washington, walking around with George Washington on a ballroom, riding on horses with George Washington. You think Trump's ever been on a horse? You think he could ever get on a horse? No, he's on his high horse, but that's about it. But he is about as antithetical to George Washington as somebody could ever come up with. Remember, he keeps trolling everybody, saying he's going to run for president a fourth time or whatever. This is a guy who he is the antithesis of George Washington, who voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms. He wanted to set a precedent, a good precedent, unlike the bad precedents that we get from Trump all the time. He wanted to set a precedent that I'm not a king. I'm not going to stay in office until I die. And so he returned back to the farm, like Cincinnatus. And King George III said he is the greatest man alive because he left that ring of power to set a good precedent. It was George Washington who said, we don't want to have entangling alliances. And look at how Trump is entangling us with Israel. I mean, an unprecedented way. And it's been bad enough in the past, but he has escalated this. Instead, George Washington said, we want to have peaceful relations and trade with other countries. Trump doesn't want that. He wants a 50% tariff with a country that we've never had a problem with on the border. We've never had to patrol the border. It's absolutely insane. He is as far from George Washington as anybody could possibly be. He's not the father of the country. He's the father of the vaccine. He's our vax daddy that is there. And don't ever forget it. Canadian soldiers fought alongside Americans in Afghanistan after 9/11. The 5,525-mile U.S.-Canada border is undefended. Nearly 330,000 people and $2 billion worth of goods cross that border every day. 800,000 Canadians live in the United States, and yet Trump's approach has been to repeatedly make inflammatory statements about Canada and making it America's 51st state, to the extent that now in these hockey games, you have Canadian players booing the American anthem when it's played. That's what Trump has brought. The Canadian public is fed up. A petition to expel the U.S. ambassador has collected nearly 218,000 signatures since July 21st. It accuses Ambassador Hoekstra of having, quote, normalized, unquote, Trump's talk of annexing Canada, among many other complaints about the Trump regime. I guess they're fed up. I guess the question is, why aren't we? As the saying goes, Trump is revolting. Why aren't we revolting, right? Why aren't we? I don't understand why people still defend this guy. I don't think either side really wants these tariffs to come into effect, said a partner at a former U.S. trade official, a partner at a law firm that does the negotiations between for tariffs and other things. Says there's a pretty strong push on both sides to try to find an off-ramp. How do we get an off-ramp? How do we get Trump to exit? I mean, everybody's talking about an off-ramp here, an off-ramp there. That's an admission that his policies are wrong. We're looking for an off-ramp for the Iran war. We're looking at an off-ramp from his tariff wars. We're looking at an off-ramp from one thing after the other from Trump. So we just can't get away from him. You know, the GOP blocking all the off-ramps from Trump. He doesn't have the authority for any of this stuff, and no single person should ever have the authority for that. The Canadians would like to have relief from U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, and we would like for them to have that as well, because if we could get steel and aluminum at lower prices, we could manufacture things at lower prices and have an opportunity to compete in the global marketplace. But not if you're going to block the raw materials under some foolish, petulant nationalism that Trump has got. There is no protectionism involved in it. There is no real revenue involved in it. It is just his ego. And so now he's turning to the Smoot-Hawley Act. I should have put in the clip from Ferris Bueller where they had that guy, Ben, what was his name? Anybody? Bueller? The Smoot-Hawley bill? Should have put that in the deck, but I didn't. Anyway, Trump has made tariffs the centerpiece of his second-term economic agenda. Think about that. His economic agenda is to increase taxes. That's what this is. He is a Democrat. He wants, his economic plan is we're going to raise taxes. And we're going to do it against people that you don't like, because I don't like them. And we are going to have prosperity because of higher taxes. And don't worry, you're not going to pay that tax. Somebody else is going to pay it. I've said all along that Trump is a New York City Democrat. That is the tactic that they always use. And yet the taxes are not paid by other people. The taxes are paid by you. We'll be right back.
The seed in our home. Hello, it's me, Volodymyr Zelensky. I'm so tired of wearing these same t-shirts everywhere for years. You'd think with all the billions I've skimmed off America, I could dress better. And I could, if only David Knight would send me one of his beautiful gray MacGuffin hoodies or a new black t-shirt with the MacGuffin logo in blue. But he told me to get lost. Maybe one of you American suckers can buy me some at thedavidknightshow.com. You should be able to buy me several hundred. Those amazing sand-colored microphone hoodies are so beautiful. I'd wear something other than green military cosplay to my various galas and social events. If you want to save on shipping, just put it in the next package of bombs and missiles coming from the USA.
Yeah, that's right. We still are operating under many different MacGuffins. Even though Trump is saying the quiet part out loud, he still has a lot of things that are hiding his true agenda. And that's really what the MacGuffin is about, right? It's just about motivating people to go do something. It doesn't matter what it is, but you've got a set plan, and we've seen this for the longest time. The plan is to push us into a surveillance society, to push us to have a mark of the beast ID. You're going to have a mark of the beast ID in order to use the internet, in order to use an app. This is being done in the name of saving the kids, or you got to have a government issued ID in order to get a job. This is what Florida was doing with the mandatory E-Verify. E-Verify has been there for quite a while. Nevertheless, to make it mandatory is to make it mandatory to have a government ID to get a job. Where does that all end? Well, we know where that ends. We know what that MacGuffin is. Sometimes it's climate change. Sometimes it's global warming. Sometimes it's global cooling. Sometimes it's just climate change. Sometimes it's the pandemic. Sometimes it's the immigrants. And with the Republicans, that is the MacGuffin that they prefer. Let's scare everybody with the immigrants, and then we'll be able to do whatever we want. Well, when we look at Trump, we were just talking about the tariff regime. It was always an apt characterization of the Democrats by Republicans to say the Democrats, their plan is to tax our way to prosperity. Quite literally, that's what this New York City Democrat Trump is doing. He's telling people we're going to tax our way to prosperity. The taxes are the tariffs. And although taxes are supposed to be enacted by Congress, they're sitting by and doing nothing. As he takes this power from them, they willingly give it up. We don't want one man having the power to control the entire economy. One man, the power to create massive amounts of taxes. And what do we see from him? Look at the boasting about how much money he collected with his usurpation of that power. Trump has made tax increases the centerpiece of his second-term economics. Last year, he imposed double-digit import taxes on almost every country, even the ones that we had trade surpluses with. What sense does that make? Why are you going to anger your customers? The Supreme Court in February ruled that he had overstepped his authority, obviously, striking down those tariffs and setting the stage for the federal government to have to pay refunds to importers. By the way, they're not paying any refunders to you, the consumer, are they? The people are going to win from this eventually after a big legal fight. You're going to get billions of dollars to the big retailers. When you look at the large retailers, when you look at people like Apple, they're going to get several billion dollars for each of those corporations. The Trump administration, even though they knew this was illegal, even though they tried to run the clock out on this stuff, and as they are fighting this losing case for which they have no case, even as they're fighting that, they tell the court, well, don't worry, let us continue to collect these tariffs, and we'll give it all back. Then they fought them on that, and they lost on that. But of course, it's not being given back. It's not being given back to the consumers who paid for that. This is all a windfall to the big corporations, which is everything that Trump does. Everything that he does is targeted towards helping Wall Street and shutting down consumers, average Americans, Main Street businesses, farms, that type of thing. We're the ones who took the hits for the tariffs, and we get no compensation, no refund from it. So when that was shut down, what did he do? He immediately looked for other ways to rebuild his tariff wall. Last month, he imposed import taxes of 10 to 15% on 59 countries, and and the European Union, which together account for 99% of U.S. imports. And the claim was that there was forced labor. Forced labor in the European Union? Come on. That's a reach, isn't it? And so this is basically, guys, just a scheming liar who breaks every single rule and defies you to stop him. Then he reached back to the Great Depression to find something, a cudgel, with which he could whack Canada. He went back to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, and that would allow 50% tariffs. Now, that was something that was enacted in 1930 as the Depression was kicking off and people were feeling the economic pressure of that. It was put in as a measure to protect the economy in general. They had tariffs up to 50%. Most economists will say that its role was to make the Great Depression much worse by restricting trade. So, nevertheless, that law, which is still on the books, authorizes the president to impose tariffs of up to 50% on imports from countries that have discriminated against U.S. businesses. No investigation is required. You just have to say, yeah, just like with an emergency. President Trump can declare an emergency and has done that on one issue after the other. Well, now we got an emergency, so now I can do an executive order. I can have martial law. I can do whatever I want. So now he claims that, well, we've got somebody who has discriminated against a U.S. business. Do you mean like some of the states that require you to support Israel? That kind of discrimination? No. No investigation is required, nor is there any limit on how long the tariffs can stay in place. And hey, you know, if it works against Canada, Trump can do this against the entire global economy. That's why I say this guy is a one-man fourth turning. The last fourth turning we had, and again, every 4 generations, about every 80 years, we do have a major fourth turning. Now we are on a globally synchronized situation, and the last one we had was the Great Depression and World War II. Before that, Civil War. Before that, the American Revolution, as far as Americans are concerned. But Strauss and Howe traced it back 500 years in English history. But now we're all in the same cycle. And so what Trump is doing is he is accelerating us into this fourth turning, which they predicted back in early 90s, about 1992, they put the book out. They predicted that the fourth turning would begin sometime in the mid-2000s with a big economic issue, because fourth turnings always have a big economic issue. Usually they have a war attached to them as well. They said it'll begin sometime in the mid-2000s. Well, we had that, didn't we? And they said it'll probably finish up about 2029. So he is the guy to accelerate all this stuff, to create a global depression and global war. Trump is your guy. Or maybe I should say Trump is the Rothschilds guy, because that's the kind of thing that they have always historically pulled. They always benefit when they take countries down, when they take countries to war. Trump is angry because Canada and China were the only countries that punched back with retaliatory tariffs of their own when he slapped levies on their products last year. Again, it is not economics, it is egonomics. That's the only thing that matters to him. Canada would retaliate again if the new 50% tariffs take effect, potentially aggravating a trade fight. Making further concessions without getting something meaningfully in exchange would probably lead to a strong backlash, make Canada look weak, and as people see the bullying on the part of Trump. So is Congress going to try to rein this guy in? This bull in the China shop? He is BS in the China shop, isn't he? He's full of BS, but he is a destructive bull in the China shop. Is Congress going to try to rein him in? No. Actually, Reason points out that Congress is trying to give him even more tariff powers. And he wants even more than they're giving him. The bill to sanction Russia, this was the one that was named after Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham would be so happy, right? Because, again, sanctions are an act of war. This is the way wars typically start. So he'd be very happy to have this happen. And, of course, he's always been after Russia. 6 years before Russia invaded, he was in Ukraine saying, well, next year you guys going to go into Russia. You're going to get Putin next year, you Ukrainians. And they're all looking at him like, come on, we're going to die for your agenda. Yeah, they did. And so because it had his name attached, because this is a memorial to the revered warmonger Lindsey Graham, this thing was a shoo-in in Congress that passed with only about a dozen people pushing back against it. And, of course, when it goes to the House, you know it's going to get rubber stamped there because it's what Trump wants. And Mike Johnson does whatever Trump wants. Trump has made a habit of recklessly overstepping the tariff powers that he has. He doesn't really have the power to do that. That is the Congress. The bipartisan bill that cleared the Senate earlier this month is meant to tighten sanctions against Russia and Iran, but it would also allow the president to impose tariffs of up to 100%, double the price, on goods from 5 countries that import the most Russian crude oil or natural gas. And so we know that Mike Johnson will rubber stamp this. Ron Wyden said this is extremely dangerous to give Trump massive new tariff powers, particularly after we have seen the disastrous impacts of his corrupt, chaotic, inflationary tariff sprees. We've seen his tariff tantrums, haven't we? Rand Paul offered an amendment in the Senate to remove the tariff provisions from the bill, but it was rejected. Rand Paul was the only Republican to vote against this Lindsey Graham bill. The bill is now in front of the House, and Trump will, of course, sign it, but he wants even more. Because that's the way these guys are. There's never enough money, never enough power, never enough corruption, never enough destruction of the Constitution and the rule of law. Tariffs are tax increases, folks. Tax increases paid by Americans. And when Trump boasts about, and he inflated the amount of money that he got from the tariffs, when he boasts about hundreds of billions of dollars that he's taken in, he stole that from you. Yes, the intention is to steer those countries away from using Russian fossil fuels, but surely there are ways to do that without hiking taxes on Americans, says Reason. And they're right. So the Senate-passed version gives the president unchecked authority to determine which countries should face tariffs, how high those tariffs will be, how long those tariffs will be in force, the same sort of ambiguity that Trump and his allies have tried to exploit in other tariff overreaches. But Congress is now going to make that legal for him to do it. Congress could add an expiration date to the tariff authority, or they could require a vote before the duties take effect, said one individual with the Cato Institute. But they don't want to do that. They want Trump to rule as a petulant dictator. And that's exactly what he's doing. So the past few years have shown that Congress made a terrible mistake in unloading so much of its constitutional authority over trade and tariffs to the executive branch. And it's not just to the office of the presidency. Congress has basically abdicated every one of their duties under the Constitution to bureaucracies. That is what we have been seeing. Now, as we see Trump ramping up war and these reckless policies, there was an article on the New York Times. Headline was, "The Blackout That Could Devastate America." And they're very right, and we've talked about this in the past. This is, if you remember, just a few years ago, we had a situation in 2013. This was snipers that shot for 10 minutes before somebody called 911. They were not shooting at people in a crowded marketplace. This is not a mass murder. No, this is very targeted. They went to a switching station, an electrical substation. And what they did was it was very calculated what they did and very precise. They precisely took out some of the cooling fins on these transformers to make sure that they would lose them without a big explosion that would draw attention to it. They did this for about 20 minutes before the police showed up. And the witnesses said, yeah, they saw a flashlight signaling these people, and they had snipers who started shooting. Then just before the police arrived, there was another flashlight signal, and these guys stopped shooting. And what happened was they took out a massive number of transformers. This type of thing, not even going to the approach that's being taken in the Ukraine-Russian war, where both Ukraine and Russia are attacking with drones the infrastructure of the other country, the grid especially. But, of course, we just saw this last week that Ukraine has been attacking the major retail distributor in Russia. Employs about 8% of all Russians. and it is a huge part of their GDP. It is the version of their Amazon, and Ukraine has been taking out one massive warehouse after the other with drone strikes. But this example shows just how easy it is for these guys to take out, even in a kind of surreptitious way. They started doing this at 1:30 in the morning, and they targeted the radiators so that they would keep it away from the electrical core, have it drain out slowly without raising an alarm with an explosion. So they just took their time pinging away at these things. That's why I say you need to think about what you're going to do, because this type of thing is going to be coming to the United States because of the policies of Trump. One of the best things that you can do is educate yourself. And again, if you look at Jack Lawson's book, go to jacklawsonbooks.com and you'll see Civil Defense Manual. It talks about how to prepare for natural or for Trump-initiated disasters, I should say, all right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but the kind of advice that you get there is going to help you throughout every kind of disaster. Again, you can go to jacklawsonbooks.com. He also has a Substack with some very useful articles, and I would highly recommend that you start to prepare for that. When we talk about economics, just look at how these people are rolling these things out. You know, we had that event that kicked off this fourth turning, the big mortgage collapse that was caused by securitization, right? Again, a scheme, a bluff, garbage. When you think about securitization, they're not going to call it that anymore. They're not going to run exactly the same thing again. They've got a different game that they're going to run. I think that is exactly what we're seeing with tokenization. And now you have major companies are openly talking about the tokenization of water. That's right, water that is essential for life. The elites are claiming that the world's water supply is going to belong to them, and they got a plan on how they're going to take control of it and how they're going to trade it. This is from Patty Johnson. She said, yeah, you heard me right. This is not a joke. This is not an exaggeration. It is the tokenization of nature. This is the very thing that at the beginning of the Trump regime, we had Doug Burgum from South Carolina, as well as Scott Bessent, Howard Lutnick. They're all talking about how they could tokenize their way out of this massive debt hole that they have created. They said, yeah, we got a deficit of $40 trillion. And as Gerald Celente will always point out, no, the unfunded mandates take that deficit up to like 160. But they said, no, we got at least $200 trillion worth of government land that we own and other natural resources. And we can just tokenize that out and get out of all this. This is the way they're going to take control of everything. You heard Klaus Schwab for the longest time saying, you will own nothing and be happy. Well, this is the way they do it. Tokenization means turning something that is real, like a house, for example, or something like a share of water rights, or a measured volume of water from a river or an aquifer, or even credits for water that was saved or recycled, turning that into a digital token, a unique digital certificate that lives on the blockchain. Yeah, just remember what they did with the mortgage fraud, with the securitization fraud. Just remember that. That's how this is going to work out. These people always have a scam. When you look at the stock market, for example, I've said many times that the stock market is to corporations what the Federal Reserve's money printing is to the federal government. You've had people, and again, we had 6 video stores. We competed with Blockbuster for a long time. After Blockbuster was bought by Viacom, the parent company of Paramount and CBS, after it was bought by Viacom, they never turned a profit. I mean, when it was run, they had a couple of guys who came up with the idea of a large store of about 6,000 square feet, and that was very profitable for them. It was bought by Wayne Huizenga of Waste Management Industries. He had a big garbage collection business. He'd become very wealthy. They operated under a profit as well, but when Paramount or Viacom got it, they never operated under a profit. Nevertheless, they continued to run for about 20 some odd years, losing money every single year. How did they do that? How do you lose money for that long a period of time? Well, Wall Street was the answer. It wasn't deep pockets from Paramount. It was the fact that they had a a happy story. Same thing happened with Moderna. Look at Moderna. They were in existence for 10 years, making tens of millions of dollars. What did they do? They pumped out a story about the latest miracle mRNA vaccine that they had, and then people found that that didn't work, and it was had a lot of adverse health effects. And so then, the stock would go down, and then they would come out with another happy story. They played that game for 10 years until Fauci set them up in business, and Trump. And so that's the way that Wall Street operates. You don't have to take a look at the AI bubble. That's the most obvious example right now. These people come out with happy stories, and as many people have pointed out, there just isn't enough money to capitalize what they're saying they're going to do with the capitalization expenditures for artificial intelligence and data centers and things like that. They don't have that kind of money. Nobody does. Nobody, not even the people in Silicon Valley, can fund that. And so it is a scam, and that's the way these people run this. And that's what they're going to do when they tokenize water. The tokens can be bought, sold, or traded on markets the same way that people trade stocks or other assets. Instead of water simply belonging to the land or to the local community or to the people who rely on it or the people whose land it falls on. We've already seen this happening in Oregon and California. The financial product that large investors, corporations, and institutions can own fractions of it and can exchange it for a profit. And so what they'll do is they'll start to tokenize the right to use, to claim, to offset, or to trade the water that becomes the commodity. This is something we should all be very concerned about. Water is the foundation of life itself, of course. Every human, every animal, every plant depends on it. Yet the same elites who lecture the public about scarcity and about climate are building the machinery to turn every last drop into a tradable asset that they can profit from while ordinary people face rationing and surveillance. When we talk about the data centers, it's not just the surveillance state that is an issue as well. It is also, first of all, we look at this and say, well, look at the hypocrisy that they're going to go out and control water when these are the people who are consuming more water than anybody else does. But it's also the surveillance, and it is also the fact they need these data centers in order to process all the transactions when they go to a full digital currency globally, when they fully enact the mark of the beast. So Goldman Sachs itself, in 2026, this year, published a report, Securing and Financing the Future of Water. This is what they're going to do. They're going to track water everywhere. They're going to track you everywhere. They are going to use their data centers to process all of that and to process all of the digital currency. You should be very concerned about this. Before we run out of time, let me thank some of the people here who have contributed to the show and read their comments. IRS Machine Gun, thank you very much for the tip. He said, just a couple of gallons of gas. That's right. That's what's happening to it now, isn't it? Gun Nut says, who needs enemies when you have Israel as your greatest ally? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you got to get close to somebody and behind them before you can stab them in the back, don't you? AP Rumble Seed. Unfortunately, once ground invasion and or tactical nukes are deployed, the U.S. will be a perpetual terror and alleged false flag target for decades to come. I agree. All this stuff began with 9/11. Look at Israel's involvement in that as well. High Boost says, honest question for David, is it legitimately time to vote for Democrats if it gets us away from the Israeli connection? And so would Dems overlook Israel and throw them to the wayside? It's not clear to me that they would. I don't think that the Democrats have the integrity that they would refuse money from Israel. I think they can be bought just like Republicans can be bought. When I look at Democrat versus Republican votes, I think it's a good thing to have divided government. So it would vary depending on where you are. You don't want to give one of these criminal gangs complete monopoly power wherever you are. And certainly here in Tennessee, I can't get behind Marsha Blackburn, for example, if she's going to push data centers and she's going to push flock cameras and all the rest of this stuff. She has been carrying the water for Trump in terms of setting up an ID to use everything on the internet. And I am adamantly against that. Now, some Democrats have spoken against that, but even if somebody speaks against something, it doesn't mean they'll follow through on it, does it? Just take a look at Donald Trump. And I just want to, before we run out of time, I just want to ask the listeners to pray for Lance's neck. He's had another injury that he got yesterday, and he's in a lot of pain right now. So Travis is doing the board today, but if you could pray for Lance, we would really appreciate it. I know that he would as well. And so when we look at the future here, we don't know what it holds, but we do know who holds the future. And just as I was talking about the cop who pushed back on the flock stuff because of his integrity, and just as we had a lot of people who refused to take the jab because of their integrity, remember the United is now fighting it all the way to the Supreme Court. The fact that they could fire people for not taking the jab. This employer thinks that they can mandate you to inject poison. How absurd that is. And of course, there are many ethical issues with this. Jason Barker of Knights of the Storm wrote a great template, really, for people to get religious exemptions for this, and that is something that has really worked. And it doesn't just work, I think, because of the First Amendment. I think it also works because God has promised us that he will honor those who honor him. And I have seen that over and over again. People who lost their jobs, as a matter of fact, the people who we get our health insurance from, the guy we get our health insurance from, we met him. He was talking about the fact that he had a job that paid him $300,000 at a major health company, and he wasn't going to take the vaccine, and it was for religious reasons. He held firm on that. His parents said, "You're crazy." But it was his religious conviction. He lost his $300,000 job, and then he started selling insurance on his own as an individual. He said, "I'm making more than that now." And I said, I've heard that story so many times from one person after the other. God honors those who honor him. He was faithful to that promise, and I have seen that honored so many times. Well, when we look at the vaccines, there was an interesting article. I don't have time to get to it today, but when we look at the fact that by their own records, 44% of diagnosed measles cases are from people who got the MMR vaccine. It's interesting. I remember years ago covering a so-called outbreak in New York, which involved 4 people. How is that an outbreak or an epidemic, right? All 4 people in the measles case, every single one of them, they could verify that they had been vaccinated, many of them multiple times. Only one person, they couldn't verify, but the person thought they'd had the vaccine and they were the right age to have been mandated to have that. And so I said at the time, why are people getting multiple shots with all this stuff? When you go back and you look at the number of shots that they give to kids in America, we are the only country that requires the number of shots. Not Japan, not the UK, not in Europe, nowhere, not in Germany. Nobody requires this level of obedience to them. And we're not even allowed to ask why that is. Again, before we end, if you're concerned about tokenization, if you're concerned about being tracked and so forth, the answer to all of that is to get real, to get something that is in your possession. And you can do that with gold and silver. Protect yourself against the inflationary policies of the U.S. government, against the devaluation of the currency, against the tokenization of everything. You can get physical gold and silver. Go to davidknight.gold, and I'll take you to Tony Arterman. Thank you so much for joining us.
The Common Man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. TheDavidKnightShow.com.